So this idea that people have that like white people created Christianity, no, white people bastardized Christianity. It was a religion that started in the Middle East that was informed very heavily by Eastern slash African, Afro-Asiatic thought.
Having a faith that isn't dominated and poisoned by toxic white evangelical stuff is something that I really love to talk about on this channel. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Ally Henny. We went deep into theology, into history, into advice on raising kids to not be white-centered. I'm so glad that you're back here. If you missed the first part, I highly encourage you to listen to that one as well. You don't need to listen to that one before this one. Let's jump right in. Yeah, colonization is, they took this picture of white Jesus, this blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy who is most likely the gay lover of the artist, and said, "Here is your God. You must listen to us because we look like him." So how have you been able to connect with brown Jesus? What's your faith like in terms of decolonizing away from white Jesus?
Oh yeah, I don't worship white Jesus. I don't acknowledge
White Jesus is the mascot of white nationalist Christianity.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I do not connect spiritually with white Jesus. In fact, the only Jesuses that I have on display in my home are brown or black. I have the most prominent Jesus that I have is the icon Christ the Liberator by Robert Lentz. That's prominently displayed in my home. And then my kids have various like children's Bibles and stuff that we make a point of getting them, like Bibles that have like brown Jesus and stuff in them, even to the point where my 5-year-old, her concept of God is a black man. And we worship at a black church, and we have a black, I'm an Episcopalian, we have a black priest, and she used to call my black priest God. She would talk about God and like whatever, and then we figured out she wasn't talking about God, she was talking about the priest. She said like there's all this stuff that was like really super duper profound, like, oh, well, God must be at the hospital right now working. And we were like, my priest is also a medical doctor. And so we were like, oh, wow, that's so profound. Yes, God is helping people at the hospital, like, whatever. And so then some different things happened. And we were like, wait a minute. She's the way that she started describing, we were like, wait a minute, she's talking about the priest. And so it's like, no, that's the priest. That's not God. Black liberation theology, womanist theology. I have a seminary degree. I have a Master of Divinity. So I've and in undergrad I also studied religion just in general. I have a degree in psychology, but then I also minored in religion. So I studied religion just in general. This religion, like, I took a class on Hinduism or whatever. Whenever I think most of my classes I tried to concentrate on like Christianity and the Bible, because that was really where I wanted to focus that learning. But of course I had to learn about world religions and stuff also. And I think that some of my education really helped me to be able to be like, and even before that, it's like, Jesus was in the Middle East. Are you meaning to tell me that he was the only white guy in Jerusalem? I mean, like that just, like wherever you really sit down and think about it, the math don't math, but it doesn't make any sense. But I also realized, because of my upbringing in the Black church, that my faith, my spirituality, my understanding of God, my interaction with God was much different than the white church, much different than what it was in white Christianity. And so I can't really ever say that there was a time or a moment or whatever whenever I was just like, oh my gosh, Jesus isn't white, or oh my goodness, like it's like whatever. Because I think that even in the history of what in America, what we call the Black church has always stood in opposition to white supremacy. We have, but like the very existence, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's something that kind of irks my soul a little bit. I understand why people draw the conclusions that they draw, but it's not historically accurate at all. But a lot of people, because they have complaints about Christianity, and a lot of Black people have complaints about Christianity, and those complaints are real and valid and true, and yes, we can have a whole conversation about that. But then what people will say is, well, why do you worship the God of the colonizers? Well, Black people were just convinced, and it's like that's not historically accurate. First of all, a lot of the European understanding of Christianity, a lot of some of those early things were informed by African thinkers. Now, African thinkers and scholars weren't out here like, yes, it's okay to enslave people. They weren't really out here on that. That was white people that did that, that used the Bible to justify that was all y'all. But Martin Luther was, a lot of his theology, for better or for worse, was informed by Augustine of Hippo. He has some problematic theology or whatever, just like everybody else. I mean, you have like white theologians who were informed by the works of African theologians. So this idea that people have that like white people created Christianity, no, white people bastardized Christianity. It was a religion that started in the Middle East that was informed very heavily by Eastern / African, Afro-Asiatic thought. There's a whole other church a whole other Christian sect, the Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church, like all these people. There's a whole other like Eastern-minded sect of Christianity. I won't go all into the history, but we are reformed, but a lot of American Christianity is informed by the Roman Empire, by people's understanding of the scripture, that then informs the Protestant Reformation, that then informs all this stuff that causes colonization and all this other type of stuff. So anyway, so all of that to say then that as a Black American, my ancestors, who I know many of them were Christians, and it was very common on plantations among enslaved people to be Christians. The faith that they adopted was not the faith of the people that enslaved them. They maybe heard different things from the same Bible, heard stories. Some of them were taught to read and could read. Being a preacher was a thing because they thought, well, oh, you're preaching to like help these people to stay in line and whatever.
The whole slave Bible fiasco.
The whole slave Bible, all that nonsense. But there were some people who could read and who read the scriptures and who read stuff like Exodus, which is why they took it out of the slave Bible. That read the story of Moses leading the children of Israel out of Exodus, out of Egypt in the Exodus, and said, oh, those people, they heard those, they read and heard those stories, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. God sets people free. God delivers people from slavery. Huh. And the white man was like, oh, we can't have them reading that. Like, we don't have them read Paul, slaves obey your masters, which this is another, like, I'm getting into all my pet peeves here of like poor biblical exegesis here. Slaves obey your masters. Paul saying that. He was not talking about American chattel slavery. That was not what he was talking about. Slavery, which we can talk about owning humans and how bad that was and like whatever, and the different ways to think about that. But the type of slavery that Paul was talking about was not the type. We Americans, we think slavery, which we should automatically think the slavery that started the Civil War, and that's not it. Slavery in different parts of the world, not gonna say it was good, not saying it was good. but it was done differently. And it was not something that like you were born into and people lived in perpetuity. A person could become free and could live free and then could be just like everybody else and whatever. That's a whole other different things. But slaves obey your master during Paul's time meant something much different than it does to us today.
And also the whole, I don't believe the Bible is infallible. And Paul also said, it's okay to beat your slave as long as you don't kill him. So clearly the Bible's not perfect and it's not meant to be taken as absolute fact in every single situation.
Exactly. I mean, there are things in the Bible that are arcane. There are things in the Bible that were speaking, it was the wisdom of its time. And throughout history, the Jewish tradition, with the Jewish tradition with the Hebrew scriptures, they have a lovely tradition that Christians really should, we have, but haven't quite held on to, this history of like interpretation. So it's like, here's the basis, here's the base, here's the source material. Now we are going to interpret what that means through time. And what it means is going to change, is perhaps going to change through time. And so all of that to say, I took the scenic route to get to the point that as a Black person, now other Black people have reached a different conclusion, and more power to them. I'm not saying that anybody has to be a Christian. Christianity is a path that I chose. It does not have to be anybody else's reality. But whenever I say that it irks my soul, what bothers me is that we can critique Christianity all day long, but let's critique the right things and let's critique it in the right way. So to say that my ancestors were worshiping the same God that their enslavers used to justify their condition, that is an insult to my ancestors. That's like saying that they weren't intelligent enough to be able to, that you're trying to condemn white supremacy, but it's engaging in white supremacy to say that people who were enslaved were ignorant enough to believe the lie. They're hearing the scriptures read. Some of them can read the scriptures for themselves. They can hear the scriptures, and that those people reach the same conclusion. Like, yeah, I mean, sure, I'm sure that there were some out there who were like, well, that's just the way that it is. But we have it documented, the primary witness of Black Christians, the primary witness was that of seeking freedom from slavery. They knew while white American Christianity tried to dehumanize them, Black Christians were constantly pushing back. Black people weren't even allowed to be baptized at first. So that's like a whole effed up history. So first of all, the colonizers had to, their first thing was, well, these people aren't really human, so we don't even really need to preach the gospel to them, which, if you're familiar at all with Christianity, the idea of telling people about Jesus, that's like a big deal. And it doesn't have to be like some people make it like super duper weird. It doesn't have it be telling people about Jesus, it doesn't have to be weird. I'm telling y'all about Jesus right now. Hopefully I'm not being super weird about it. But like, it's just telling people about Jesus and saying, hey, this can be good news for you. And they at first didn't want to tell Black people about the good news of Jesus. And they didn't want to tell Black people about the good news of Jesus, because if they told them about the good news of Jesus, they would have to acknowledge that they were human. And if they acknowledged that they were human and if they had a soul, then they would have to accept them as siblings in Christ. They would have to accept them as members of their church, as members of their body. So they couldn't do that. So they started out as, well, these people, they don't even really have souls. They don't even this and that. That worked for a while. After a while, that dog stopped hunting. So then it turned into, okay, well, we can preach the gospel to them, because we figure out well, whenever enslaved people become Christians, they seem to be better workers. Like that's what they said. I don't know how true that was, but that's what they said. Well, it seems to make them better workers whenever they become Christian. So we can let them become Christian in like name, but we can't baptize them, because whenever people became Christian, whenever these enslaved people became Christian, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, Jesus, that's good news to me. So if that's good news to me, Jesus said that he came to set the captives free. So and also, like, the Bible says that you can't enslave like a person who's like you, like in the Old Testament, a fellow Jew. You can't do that. So we're siblings in Christ, so you can't enslave me, right? And so then the white people were like, ooh, they got a point. Okay, so we have to change it up. We have to switch it up on them. But like, we can't say that, well, okay, they can become Christians, but in order to be a Christian, you have to be baptized. So we just won't baptize them. So then they were like, well, okay, but you won't you won't baptize us. Well, that's not okay. And so then it became, okay, well, we're gonna baptize y'all, but like, you still aren't members of the Christian church. We're just doing this because we care about the soul that we said 100 years ago you didn't have. And so then Black people could be part of the churches. They could be baptized, but they weren't seen as, it was there was an edict that basically said, like, that Black people can be baptized. These enslaved people, they can be baptized. They can be Christians. They need to go to church because it's our duty as good Christians to do that. But we can't treat them equally.
Okay, so is this like the root of church membership?
Perhaps.
Yeah. Worth looking into.
Definitely worth looking into. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the root of church membership. The root of church membership, really, it goes back to Christendom. It goes back to the empire. But some of our expressions of this in America, and kind of the who's in, who's out, who's whatever, being able to prove who's who, there's definitely some roots in slaveholder religion to this.
I wanted to just shift gears a little bit. Do you have any advice for raising kids to not be white-centered?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it starts with, I'll answer from two perspectives. So from the perspective of like talking about kids of color, you're a parent, a Black parent, or a parent of color toward kids of color. I guess you could also be a white parent of kids of color, but maybe the other advice would apply to you too. That as a parent to a child that is that's a BIPOC, that's a Black Indigenous person of color, it's important that you don't force assimilation, and that you emphasize the culture, that your culture in your home. And even, I've referenced a couple of times that I'm married to a white man, which is true, but I have a Black home. The culture of our home, in general, is Black. The music that we listen to, the music that my kids prefer, even though I really like 90s alternative rock, I've made sure that that's not typically, Black people like that music, but that's not typically a genre that's associated with Black people. But I've tried to make sure that my kids are exposed to music that is indigenous to my culture. That the shows that we watch, that the dolls that they have, the books that we read, the topics that we talk about. We're avid listeners of NPR, just because I don't know why, we just listen to NPR a lot. And so I try to talk about the news and different things from a Black perspective, and give them that perspective. The foods that we eat, a lot of them are my cultural foods, and so that's something that's very important, especially if you live in a situation where your children are the minority. It's very important to give them those things at home. And if you maybe have disconnected, because we're getting into where, a lot of people have grown up in the suburbs and this and that, where they've been disconnected from their culture, you need to find that and reclaim that for yourself, and give them what you have, and work very hard to get your kids into spaces that are, if not primary, if not exclusively, or at least primarily, people who are from your culture. As a white person raising white kids, the advice that I would give is to make sure that your kids are not in exclusively white spaces. And whenever I say exclusively white spaces, I don't mean like, oh, but yeah, we have like, one or two or three token people of color. That's still a white space. You need to put your children in situations where your culture is not the dominant culture. One of my best friends is white. She has a daughter who's black. She has two kids, two sons who are white. And something that she intentionally does with her kids, it kind of serves a double purpose, because has a kid who's a transracial adoptee, who needs to be exposed to her culture, but then she also has these white male kids, who need to not be in a white centered environment. And in her town, there is a summer school, essentially, that is for teaching Black history. And it's open to everyone. Most of the people who were there, though, all the teachers and most of the people, like 90% of the people who were there, are Black. And so she and a couple of other of the white women in that community that I know, they intentionally bring their white children into that space. And it's always, every year is interesting to kind of hear some of the stories and the feedback that come out of that, because that's one moment, that's 1 week out of 52 weeks in the year, where they are exclusively in a space that is exclusively not their culture, and they have to learn how to navigate that. But that's something that, if you can do it for more than 1 week, get in places that maybe make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Now, don't jump into spaces that aren't yours to be in, but these different cultural fairs, different things. Get your people into places that aren't like your culture. Watch TV. Maybe you're not from a city, so you're not able to be exposed to cultural things. Watch TV shows, engage with movies, read books, buy your kids books, buy your kids Black dolls. White kids can play with Black dolls. There's no reason why there's no reason for every single one of your kids' dolls to be white. None on this earth. Get your kids lots of diversity in their toys. Intentionally, sometimes white people will get into this thing where they just think that like diversity, or kind of being like, they just sort of like, it's something that's just going to come, and you can sort of like put your kids like kind of artificially in spaces, and not have so you can like show up to like, oh, I'm gonna go see the Black Panther movie, and that's somehow doing something for your kids, which it is. But even better is becoming friends with and having people of color in your life, in your community. Like, not just like, oh, because sometimes like white people be like, oh, that's my friend, but like, have they been in your home? And I know that we're in the middle of the Panic at the Disco, but like, have people in your home, have people in the intimate parts of your life, not just superficially. So yeah.
I like that. Thank you. How do you keep your peace with probably so much hate and misunderstanding coming your way from all the work you're doing on TikTok and Facebook and everything, books and everything? And yeah, just how do you keep from being bitter?
That's a good question. For me, a lot of it is my faith. That helps keep me rooted and grounded in love. But so I would say that perhaps is the primary thing. I would also say, like, I always joke that, like, I was joke with my husband, like, God knew what he was doing whenever like I ended up getting married to a white man, because like if I didn't have like like evidence of like evidence that I can see of somebody in like, you know, the life that they put out in front of people and the life that they are behind the scenes of like of a white person that is consciously trying to not be racist. Like I don't know if I would have very much hope, very much hope for the world. But yeah, so I really try to stay grounded in my spiritual practice. I really try to protect my peace by stepping away if I have to, and sometimes stepping away. I've done that to varying degrees, with, you know, social media, with whatever. But sometimes, you know, just is like there are times, because this actually happened to me recently, where you have getting all these comments on this TikTok that people just don't like, and it's hurting their feelings, and it's whatever, they're mad, and it's just sort of like, you know what, I'm going to protect my peace by not wandering into that comment section. And I'm just gonna, you know, I'm going to protect my peace by recognizing I don't have to offer my opinion. I don't have to comment. I don't have to think about or analyze every single bit of racism that happens in the culture. And realizing that, you know, there are a lot of other people out there who can take up the mantle, who can share, who can speak out or whatever. And I don't have to speak out about everything. There's a lot of other things that I could say, but the root of it is essentially staying grounded. And whatever staying grounded means, it might mean different things to different people, but it's staying grounded, and it's looking toward the people who are attempting to do good, even if they're struggling with it, even if they're maybe, you know, falling flat on their face with it. Sometimes they're trying to not be a garbage monster. And so, like, being happy with those people, like, you know, there are people out here who are trying very hard not to be a garbage monster. And so those people are the ones that give me hope, because they can collect the other people who are being garbage monsters. So yeah.
Thank you so much for just taking the time to share all of this. It's such an awesome and meaningful conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to promote of what you're working on? How people can get into contact with you if you're open to that?
Yeah, so so you can find me on Facebook. It's just my name, Ally Henny. If you enjoy my spiritual reflections or contemplations or stories or whatever, you can find me also on Facebook, at God Talk with Ally Henny. So just like, if you look at my name, you'll probably see two pages. One's God Talk with Ally Henny, the other is just regular old Ally Henny, and you can follow those pages. I'm also on TikTok as the Ally Henny. That's my handle over there. I'm also on Twitter as the Armchair Com. The Armchair Com is short for the Armchair Commentary, which is my blog that I've not had a new thing on in years, but it's there. I'm going to start adding to it. It just hasn't happened yet. If you'd like to support my work, I'm on Patreon. You can become a patron of my work, and you get just different articles, different things that I do every month. So that's another way to connect with me. I'm also on Instagram, Ally Henny on Instagram. I'm trying to think of what else.
If you think of anything, you can tell me, and I'll just put all your links in the description.
Yep, I think that's all the places that I'm at.
The way that I end my conversations is I give hugs.
Oh, virtual hugs.
Virtual hugs. Thank you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on this show. Thank you. You asked very wonderful questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. On this YouTube channel, I do podcasts and vlogs, just being real about life, and I'd love for you to subscribe and stick around.